Eric Kaufmann is an academic, social scientist, and was until just recently the Professor of Politics at Birkbeck University of London. He's resigned from that position, citing the encroaching, sometimes informal, restrictions on academic freedom. Eric, welcome back to GB News. Thank you for joining us. Of what thought crimes are you guilty?
Right. So what happened is essentially I had a few Twitter pylons, an open letter, etc., mainly about what I was saying in the press and also on social media. So something as innocuous as sort of making fun of Justin Trudeau being unable to say the words LGBTQ, that would be enough to sort of lodge in the complaint dossier. So that's an example of the kinds of things. Any sort of opposition to movements that characterize themselves as anti-racist, anti-fascist, or pro-trans, or whatever, any sort of questioning lands you in hot water in this sort of environment.
What about more substantial works? Have you written things, chunks of prose that arouse their ire?
Well, they don't tend to read very deeply. So, yes, I have had a book with Penguin in 2018, which was on right-wing populism. You know, it was largely an empirical analysis. I sort of perhaps was arguing, not as forcefully against some of these movements as they would like, but I don't think that's really the cause here. They read tweets, they don't read books, so really what gets them going is more the social media.
You keep saying they. Who are they?
Yes. So what we're talking about is a sort of network of radical activists, students to some degree in the student union, to some degree staff, and people on Twitter. And they are all interacting and coordinating to some degree. So they might, for example, decide we're going to do a Twitter mob. We're going to sort of put something out on Twitter, and we'll try and get as many people as we can to like it and to comment and to attack and to push the university to fire somebody.
How many people might that be? How many people does it take to intimidate a university?
Well, I wouldn't say the university was necessarily intimidated or that they acted badly, but certainly it would be, could be in the thousands, small thousands. It's a small network, but if you're a university and you see even a few hundred or 1,000, you think, oh my God, this is big.
But why? What? That's exactly what I'm getting at.
Yes.
It's a few hundred or a few thousand.
Right.
Why are institutions, in this case a university, but it could be a business, it could be a government, why are they terrified of 100 or 1,000 people?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I think they have entire departments which are dedicated to managing the university's brand, and so anything becomes a big deal. That's number one. I mean, the other thing is that they are acutely sensitive on anything around diversity, equity, etc., because they've made these commitments and because they sort of all watch each other and they're held up to that by, left-wing staff, for example. I mean, and let's not forget that students in Britain lean about 6 to 1 left to right. The academics are even more so, maybe 9 to 1 left to right in the social sciences. So there is this certain sensitivity around these issues, and so they will respond to some degree.
But there are lots of people with whom I don't agree politically, but I don't go out to try and make them lose their job.
Right.
When you say the staff are 9 to 1, I hope you don't mean that, those 9 would like everyone to lose his or her job.
Not at all, not at all. And in fact, it's only about 1 in 10 academics that are pro-cancel culture in terms of firing people. So it's a very small but very vocal minority.
Sorry. In a university, if you're telling me that 1/10 of staff are in favour of cancelling, I call that a very large number, because I thought universities were about free speech.
Right, but of course what's happened is that the ideology of the cultural left, or the left in general, has shifted to be more illiberal and intolerant. And we can see that amongst young people in survey data very clearly, that this is now a much more illiberal movement than it used to be 20 years ago, for example. So that's part of the problem, is the culture of the left, of the young left, is much more illiberal and intolerant, all based on this idea of emotional trauma and emotional safety, free speech causing this kind of psychological harm to designated minority groups, and therefore it must be shut down.
How did the university authorities of Birkbeck, University of London, react? And how should they have reacted?
Well, I don't really fault them. I mean, they didn't obviously fire me, but there is a process that the activists know they can activate, which is that whenever they make an internal formal complaint, it gets investigated. And so they knew that if they could get somebody to make an internal complaint, then they can make your life hell. And that's there's a phrase, the process is the punishment. So you get the email telling you to report to this tribunal who will decide your fate. And it's all quite unsettling. And in a way, they've learned how to weaponize these university procedures. The actual top levels of the university are reasonable. They know the law, etc., but It's the interaction between these activists and these procedures that really causes the problem.
You may not want to, but
Yeah.
do you want to dwell just for a moment on what kind of anxiety that produces in a person like you?
Yeah, because, I mean, the thing about academia is, there's hundreds of applications for every position. If you're out, there's a tight network, gossip travels fast. So if you find yourself out of a job, you're not getting back in the system. So that creates a lot of anxiety, and you don't know what your punishment will be. Might it be, a small punishment? It could be that you're fired, and your mind gets racing, right?
And
so,
by the way,
yes,
you're
yeah.
happily talking about punishment as though there had been a crime.
Right.
We're talking
right.
here about a situation where there is no crime.
Precisely. But you don't, even if you're, and you may well be exonerated, that is the likelihood. But still, it's the not knowing that sort of is, and that's the intent, I think, is just to create a chill so that they know next time you think about speaking out, you'll shut up and you won't.
You've taken a position now at the University of Buckingham. Is that because the University of Buckingham is different?
Yes, University of Buckingham is probably the only one of about 180 institutions in Britain that is explicitly prioritizing free speech and academic freedom over some of this emotional safety, DEI sort of agenda, social justice agenda. And I think for that reason, it's been very clear that it will give you maximum latitude in terms of freedom of research, teaching, expression, discussion. So it's different. And in a way, and that sort of allowed me to set up now I'm going to set up a couple of things. One is a 15-week course on wokeism and ideology, because we are, it's a very important ideology. It's making headlines across the West. It's changing electoral results, and yet there are no papers. Nobody's studying it critically because it's too uncomfortable, and people are just not going to want to touch that. The way they would, say, the populist right or fascism, which rightly receives a huge amount of academic attention, but this doesn't.
Very briefly, if you would,
Yes.
Will things in future get worse or better?
I think they are likely to get a little bit better over the short term, but worse over the long term. And the reason I say that is that the younger population under age 30 is considerably more illiberal and intolerant of speech that supposedly offends minority groups. And so that means that as that generation becomes the median, so we know that young academics on the left are twice as intolerant as old academics on the left. And so as that group becomes the median, I think we're going to be in bigger trouble, not less trouble.